Good morning. Atamarie, which is Maori for good morning. I'm Tina Jordan, Secretary of ARANZ, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Teressa Ward, who joined the National Archives of Australia as an Assistant Director General in 2015, following a decade in the senior executive of various social policy departments. She led a team of 190 staff in multiple locations to modernise approaches to archival appraisal and ingest, analogue and digital preservation, storage and lending, and subsequently assumed responsibility for Commonwealth information policy and management. In 2018-19, Teressa moved to lead a small task force which will work across archives to embed digital archiving capability and accelerate the digital transformation in the archives with a future rollout across Australian government agencies. I'm looking forward to hearing this. Welcome, Teressa.
Before starting, I acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay my respects to elders past and present and any other First Nations people attending here today. Gana Miuna, Gana Yata, Nadalu Tampinthi. Particularly at this conference, we recognise the significance for Kaurna people of their cultural heritage and beliefs, and we welcome opportunities to work with them. As Julie mentioned, I'm here today to talk to you about the most recent efforts of the National Archives of Australia, the NAA, to embrace the opportunities and manage some of the challenges of the digital age. The main aim, in the end, is to increase, radically we hope, the speed and volume of access. I'm getting to replay. Sorry. The speed and volume of access by the public to significant archival records. I was really interested and heartened to hear Michelle talk. It's good to know that there are people in academia and amongst students and people of professional interest who do spend the time thinking through some of those issues about biases and limitations. I know from my point of view in a largely operational role that we are very focused on the material that has already been appraised and is yet to be described and yet to be digitised to make it really valuable to people. So we know that there are many past policy decisions by governments and institutions that have had lifelong effects for people and for First Nations people, alienation from lands, loss of rights to freedom, self-determination, denial of citizenship, loss of children, have all had a considerable impact on opportunities and physical and mental health. And Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians have been impacted by past policies in regard to adoption without consent and other matters like unaccompanied child migrants and what happened to those children. On the other hand, a significant proportion of the population have also been positively impacted by some decisions on education, healthcare, investments in infrastructure and so on at certain points at times. As we've seen, and we continue to see, citizens want in a democratic society, they have a right to know the impacts of government policies and the evidence that underpins their rights and entitlements. Notice I just wasn't doing that, sorry. Citizens want to be part of the conversation more than just placing a vote. They want to be at the table, and that is something to manage in a democracy. How we do that, do we do it well? You would have no doubt seen, and you can't have missed yesterday's front pages of the media, united in protest against the erosions of what they saw as erosions of freedom of the press in a democracy. That debate about the tension between protecting both the national security and freedom of information, both of which our government is committed to, is one that we will, as a country, have to have. In Australia, while the rights of citizens to archival information is enshrined in the Archives Act, we're not immune to tensions between security and the free flow of information. Indeed, while the parameters shift, are debated and eventually embedded in law, we at the NAA pay careful heed to what the law at any given point in time enables us to do to make information as accessible, as widely as possible. And we spend a lot of time making those decisions to make information available. That's the reason why we exist. We are of the view in the archives that this is fundamental to addressing the loss of trust between citizens and their governments and other public institutions, widely acknowledged around the world as a crisis of democracy. This crisis, ironically enough, has emerged at a time, or perhaps because of it, has emerged at a time when there's never been more information, more accessible in the public arena. Social media, driven by individuals and online publishers inside and outside of the traditional media, and online access to information from a wide array of other institutions, have created a conundrum about what is fake and what is authentic. In this, archives have always had a central role in providing certainty to citizens about the provenance of government information and the reliability of the processes by which the authenticity of that information has been retained. Archives has always undertaken this role. However, the task of providing trusted access has got greater potential and is also more complicated in the digital world. In Australia, government agencies have been creating information for a wide range of digital formats for nearly 30 years, and they've been digitising their analogue records for more efficient workflows and data extraction. A percentage of that will flow to government archives in a complex range of formats for preservation, retention and access. Government agencies have been generally strong in maintaining their analogue information, but have struggled to keep up with the fast pace of changing digital technologies and have not kept in front of issues of changing technology, obsolescence, damage and loss of their digital records. The NAA, under the Act, is responsible for ensuring that the archival resources of Australian government agencies are retained, preserved and made accessible. Digital items are also embedded in more complex conceptual relationships, and our metadata schemas need refinement to ensure more granular controls of these sort of items for discovery and reuse. So while citizens want certainty and they want and expect fast access online at any time and any place, governments have also seen opportunities in the exponential growth of computational power and the huge volumes of data for which innovation to support enhanced policy development, service provision and economic growth. For governments and business, data is the capital of the digital age in the information era, in the way that land, plant and equipment, fossil fuels have been and fresh water is increasingly becoming. For us, the drivers towards digital transformation are numerous. We're finding better ways to control digital information, preserve it and make it accessible to the public, and to play our role in fulfilling the Australian government's aspiration to be one of the top 3 digital governments in the world by continuing to work with agencies from the creation to disposal or transfer of their information. I'm sure most archivists would agree that digital transformation is the great challenge facing cultural institutions, largely because of the rapid exponential growth of technology, which is even outstripping the growth of data. And some of the archives have been at this digital change for a longer time than the National Archives of Australia, while others have been at it for a much shorter time but have made great leaps. We're somewhere in the middle. And a lot of what we've done is borrow from our friends, like the National Archives of the UK, NARA, the Finnish Archives, in terms of digitisation, and learn and grow with them, collaborate with them and adapt things to our local context. And at other times we've shared what we've done and what we've learnt with others that are coming behind us. And in some cases we're ahead on some things and behind on others, and that's the case for others as well. So the collaboration is something we highly value in forums such as the Digital Preservation Coalition and other bilateral arrangements that we have with other archives. At At the National Archives, we've been managing digital records in our collection since the 1970s while working with a huge volume of analogue records. However, we have, like other archives, found it hard to keep up with growing our technology because of the tight fiscal environment that we have. We did develop and put into production a bespoke system in 2007, and in 2012 we developed an AV system that was a COTS product that we put into production. But since then, technology has rapidly evolved, and our staff have been busily working away with what is federated systems, which they have to do a lot of, the IT staff, a lot of workarounds to make everything work. The archivists have gotten very used to all the manual interventions that they have to do in order to be able to use the technology that we've got to deliver across the continuum of the record, from ingest to access. And it's been difficult with diminishing budgets and diminishing staff levels, like all the cultural institutions have been subjected to. We're no different from them. We have benefited from undertaking a public-private partnership to develop a new purpose-built building that some have visited. It's up there. That's our new building in Canberra. It's a purpose-built repository, and it certainly came in the nick of time for many of our analogue records, both paper and AV, film and photographs. But as we have had in discussions with government, fantastic buildings, as appreciated as they are, because we've got 350 shelf kilometres of paper records across Australia, and we're going to get 178 more by the time 2027 comes around, that we really value having this building, and also the more minor refurbishment that we've done in Western Australia, moving into a new repository there. But this isn't going to help us manage the digital deluge that we're going to have. And at the moment, we have about 1.5 petabytes of AV records, 75 terabytes of other digitised records, but we're expecting by 2027 to have around 25 petabytes of records. So that we've been anticipating that for some time, and it was very fortuitous for us that in 2017 we were able to buy a enterprise-grade digital store that was scalable and had offered modern technology for storage. But we weren't able to buy other technology, other software to support an end-to-end digital archive at that point. So we had been trying with our own digital transformation to do work on the side, researching what we would need and trying to develop strategies and plans to take our needs forwards to make cases to government for greater funding. We decided in 2018 that we really couldn't do it. Diminishing staff levels, same level of work, we needed to do something a little bit more radical. And so the CEO, the Director General, took an informed risk to set aside a small team of about 13 people to work out a strategy for our own transformation. And that strategy had a number of pillars to it. And it involved people from across the archives working on it. So the small team of 13 would go and do research, would pull papers together, and then they would consult the subject matter experts from across the archives in order to pull that work in and relieve people of trying to do that work themselves. So we decided that the pillars of our work for our digital transformation was to fully implement our enterprise-grade store, go to tender for end-to-end preservation and archival control and discovery solutions, to review our existing policies, starting with digital preservation and our metadata model to determine whether they were fit for digital. Any other upgrades that we were doing, such as our website and a building upgrade, we were looking to incorporate whatever modern digital technologies we could, and in those cases it would be, instead of static exhibition material, which we still have, we'd also have digital walls and other more interactive technology where we could. We also commenced work on researching and developing a digital capability program, basically a staff training program in digital archiving. And that involved our most senior digital archivist working with Adrian Cunningham, who many of you will know, and reviewing DigCurve, which is a European curricula for digital archiving, and modifying that for the Australian context. They also did a sample survey of our staff to identify where the staff skills were, having done digital archiving for some years, but not with more modern technology, and where the gaps were, to develop some rolling programs of training. And our idea was trying to synchronise getting in the digital store, working towards getting more modern preservation solutions and discovery solutions, archival management solutions, and bringing our staff along as well to understand the environment they were going into, because people do get comfortable and feel safe and secure in the environment they know, and the devil is in what they don't know. So we started that training in February, and it had 3 sort of layers to it. Those layers were a broad understanding of what a digital archiving and ecosystem is, and then understanding the sorts of skills that you do need for particular jobs as you are somewhere in the continuum for digital archiving. And then ultimately it will be, when we get new software, specific training on that software. Now, when we talk to staff, they invariably want to know specifically what they're going to be doing. And we've had to explain to them that you actually have to think about archiving slightly differently when you're doing digital archiving, and that you really need to understand that system end to end before you sort of work down the layers to the next level of knowledge. And that's been reasonably well accepted. We've had staff very keen to do the training courses that we've identified. We'll be making those known and available on our website so that we can share it with our other archival partners elsewhere in the world and around the country. So there was that element of training staff, but there's also a big element around communicating with them, and you can never do that enough. Even when you think you've done enough, you've got to do 5 times more than that. And we found in our organisation that we have staff working on very many different levels. Some have got more routine jobs, others have got more intellectually focused jobs. So we've had to target our communications and training to all the different sorts of backgrounds our staff come from and make that a comfortable experience for them, especially with the trainings in a group, and people need to feel comfortable and secure when they're asking questions, as they should. That was the training program. We will be rolling that out over a 2 to 3 year period. And we've had to do quite a lot of work in the background so that we can monitor and report on what training our staff have done to make sure that we've got a wide range of coverage. There's been a lot of coordination with our human resources area to make sure that that all works within the systems that we've got. The other work that was important to us in doing the tender for the software was the work that the business analysts needed to do, along with people from the business areas, in working with all of the teams by building up user cases for each of the areas. And one of the things that took longer than we thought it might was people understanding that it's not the process that they know that matters, it's what are the outcomes that you need to get. And it took a little bit of a while to talk about that, and there might be other ways of achieving those outcomes that you can accept and feel comfortable with. And we built up the RFT. It was a very long and detailed document, having set out all of those user cases, as well as all the specifications that you need, the standards that you have to meet, all of those requirements for the RFT. Reviewing our existing policies was also important, and it was important that it was done with the staff. So we had our archivist, who was the lead of one of the teams, identify what the old policy was, start a strategy for consulting with staff about where we would need to go next, what does the research show, what is the standards and requirements of digital preservation, and help build up that picture of what a new digital preservation policy should look like. Similarly with a metadata model, that's been one of our more successful projects in the archives in terms of working with our teams, because we knew that we needed much more granular means of control for digital objects. And we invented the Australian record series system, and that hadn't been reviewed for a very long time. So a lot of work was done on doing some initial research and then taking that out to small specialist working groups, and when they'd worked up a product, that would be taken out much more broadly in the archives and socialised with everyone so that everyone felt that they understood and had contributed to what we were developing. So we've actually approved a new model, and at the moment the whole of our organisation is working on metadata schema, which will then be trialled in our piloting of our new software and refined that way before we publish that next year sometime. Research, co-design, taking the burden off people of bringing some of the work together, but then involving them deeply in what's developed was a really important thing for us to do with our staff, and we can never do enough of that, except for the limits of the hours of the day. Other work that we've done outside of my team, and some of this work was done in other branches, of course, was that there's research on using AI in appraisal and doing some co-design and piloting of those sort of technologies. Now, my colleague, Tatiana Ansiposa, is going to be talking about that in some detail tomorrow, if you're interested in going along and hearing about that. So our aim for all of our work on end-to-end integrated archival management was to have a scalar, modular and secure system, one that met all of our security requirements. Obviously the archives has got some very sensitive information, and our data is an asset that needs to be protected. It needed to also have elastic computing power, the most modern preservation technologies consistent with the standards, and secure connectivity, and using automation as much as possible. With the downsizing of staff over the last half a dozen years, it's been very important to us that we try and minimise the manual intervention that we had to date with our legacy systems. So we are working very hard to try and automate as much as we possibly can. The other work that we do in the archives is with the whole of government, and one of our statutory requirements is to engage with agencies and set the standards for those agencies. We've been doing that since the 90s, but in the last 8 or 9 years we've been working very carefully and closely with agencies, setting the Digital Continuity 2020 policy and having a benchmark for agencies to meet in order that they value their data as an asset, that they work digitally, and that their systems and processes are interoperable. We've been doing that work for a while, but in the more recent interest by government overall in data as capital, as an asset that can be used and reused to create new value, there's been a great crowdedness in the policy space. Everyone is now interested in data, and not always with a great deal of knowledge about how you keep that data to be preserve its integrity. So we've taken our place in that group of core organisations working in the data space, data reuse, Australian data policy, to reassert and get them to work with us on working with all of our agencies to make sure they are meeting their milestones, that they are in a good position to protect their data, because that's not something that they've been very good at before. They've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to do. The DC 2020 policy identified a number of key actions for government agencies, and it winds up next year, and we're now working with core agencies on our future approach and how we take it forward further with agencies. And what we really need is our core agencies to work with us to provide that gravitas. This is a whole of government endeavour, and the value is not just the work, it's the work to the community and what they're able to access, but also to the economy and to keep Australia competitive. So our future work is that we will, just winding up on the end now where we're going to go next, we've been doing this transformation, assisting and collaborating with our IT area and our business areas for the last 18 months. We have established the training projects and the baseline policy framework. Our next steps will be to complete the training of our staff and do more collaboration with other agencies. We've done some, for example, with the TNA on blockchain and how that might be used. So there'll be an even smaller group of people that will be working on the forefront of digital policy and how you roll that out in archives as a sort of conduit to the rest of the organisation to bring the rest of the organisation along. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving now on to our next plenary session, which is the 14th, as it happens, Loris Williams Memorial Lecture, which is the ASA hosts every year. Every year for the last 14 years. And before, I will ask the Loris Williams lecture presenters to come up, please. This is a number of them. We're in for a treat today. So if they could come up to the stage and take their seat, and while they're getting ready and come through, I'm going to invite Kirsten Thorpe to come and tell us a little bit about Loris Williams and the very influential and a person that we have great affection for, Loris Williams herself, and tell you a little bit about her and her background and why we celebrate her every year. Thank you, Kirsten. Come through.
Thanks, Julia. Quite amazing to think that it's been 14 years since we've held these lectures. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, communities and families, and acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present in the room. And I'm really looking forward to this session. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just introducing Loris Williams to people who don't know her. But for those that did know Loris, this is a really nice opportunity every year to remember her. So my family are Warramai from Port Stephens in New South Wales on my mother's side of the family. So Loris Williams was a passionate advocate for the right of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to use archives as a means of connecting with their family, country and Indigenous identity. Loris was the first Aboriginal person from Queensland to gain professional qualifications and only the second Aboriginal person to do so at the time. She spent the last 11 years of her life helping Indigenous people to reconnect with their Indigenous identity and encouraging her professional colleagues, non-Indigenous as well as other Indigenous people to recognise the significance of this work. Loris was strongly connected to her Aboriginal heritage through her mother, Agnes Nee Bell, who was from the Birrigubba people of North Queensland, and through her father, Cyril, who was from the Mulunjali people from the Bow Desert area of South Brisbane. Loris grew up in Brisbane in a strong family, and we've met many of her sisters over the years at the ASA conference. She began work as a machinist and then joined Telstra as a telephone operator. At the age of 42, having been at Telstra for over 25 years, she was made redundant. She returned to study at the University of Technology in Sydney and graduated with a Bachelor of Education with a major in Aboriginal Studies. In 1999, she commenced part-time study for a graduate diploma in Archives and Records at Edith Cowan University, graduating in 2004. In 1994, she began work assisting researchers at the Indigenous Resource Unit at the State Library of Queensland, and in 1998, she moved to the Centre for Community and Personal Histories in Queensland. Part of her work was spent working at the Queensland State Archives to help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clients to trace their family and community through the records. Apart from a short secondment to the State Library of Queensland in 2002, she remained with Community and Personal Histories until she passed away in 2005. In 1999, Loris told the story of her family's journey through the archives at the Australian Society of Archivists conference and spoke of the emotional roller coaster that involved. She urged archivists to be aware of both the great happiness and the angry despair which Aboriginal could experience as they traced their identity, and she called on archivists to allocate the resources for indexing Indigenous records so that people could readily access their precious stories. The Indigenous Issues Special Interest Group of the ASA, after Loris's passing, put in tremendous work to acknowledge her in these yearly lectures. And I'd like to acknowledge Phyllis Williams and Andrew Wilson, who were a part of that journey. I hold Loris's legacy deep with me in all the work that I do, and I'm really looking forward to hear this lecture today to keep that spirit with us of prioritising Indigenous perspectives in the sector. Thank you.
Yes, I was reflecting myself on that 1999 conference, both Loris and there was a fabulous, also another lecture by Sonia Smolacom that year, and I think that really has stayed with me 20 years on and dictated much of what I do in my work and practice. Now, let me introduce the team led by the Director of the National Centre for Aboriginal Language and Music Studies, NCAMS, at the University of Adelaide. Professor Aaron Corn is here. And Aaron, I might actually get you to introduce everybody, just because you know them well, and there's a team here, and we've got a couple there. So over to you, and please enjoy this lecture. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Just have to plug the laptop in. Just wait. It's up. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for those words of welcome and introduction. It's a great honour and privilege for us to be here today to speak to you and also to speak at this lecture that commemorates and honours the memory of such an important person in Australian archiving. My name is Professor Aaron Corn. I'm Director of the National Centre for Aboriginal Language and Music Studies at the University of Adelaide. And I am very delighted to be able to present this panel to you today. My colleagues who are here with me in the strange and unique structure of our university come from the three component units that make up NCAMS, and I'll go through them in a moment, and also the university library where the university archivist works, and she's here with us too. Our first speaker will be Uncle Rodney O'Brien from Garnawara Pinchindi, which is the unit that does the world's leading research into the Kaurna language, which is the original language of Adelaide. So therefore, and I asked Uncle Rod about this before, I should be welcoming you thus, Nina Mani, to which you say, Mani ai. Okay, so let's practice that again. Nina Mani. Great. How was that? Did it pass the test? There's a test. So Uncle Rod will speak first. Following him, Karina Lester, manager of the mobile language team, and her colleague there, Eleanor McCall. And the mobile language team does a huge amount of work in Australian languages across the state of South Australia, where we're located now, and also over the borders into some of Australia's other states and territories. Finally, rounding out the NCAMS contribution to this panel will be Grayson Rottimer, my colleague, the Centre for Aboriginal Studies and Music, known as CASM for short. We also, at the very end of this session, have a surprise to you involving two of CASM's students who are named there, Nathan May and Courtney Lawton. Finally, we're very fortunate at the University of Adelaide because we have a direct line to the university archivist, and the reasons and importance of that will become clear to you as this presentation progresses. The University Archivist, who is now in charge of Special Collections, Archives and Record Keeping, or SPARC for short, is Leah Moroso, and she's here with us today as well. So thank you for having us, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce Uncle Rod.
Good morning, everyone. Look, before I start my talk, I just wanted to, it's important that I welcome you to my country in my language first, so I'll do that. It's part of our cultural protocol to do this. Our people did this for 1,000 years. So to start off, I'll do this now. Machwanga Gana Mena, Naiwangani, Mani Nabudni, Gana Yatana. Alberco Mankalankla, Tandanya Meniko, Nachi Yongandaya, Nachi Yakandaya, Padni Adu Wadu. So on behalf of the Ghana people, I welcome you to Ghana country. I do this on behalf of Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's walk together in harmony. So we're here to talk about language. I'm going to talk about Ghana language in particular, Ghana Warra Pichinji, which means creating Ghana language. But just there initially is the map of the indigenous languages of Australia. Initially, before pre-European contact, there was over 250 languages in Australia, indigenous languages, but now it's said that, according to the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Studies, that only 13 languages are first language of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island spoken today, children. So, and of that 250 originally, there's really only 113 or so spoken to some degree, still continuing today. So there's been a loss of a lot of our languages. So we don't want to lose any more, because it's said that 90% of our languages are endangered, and Ghana language was one of those. So I'll just show you where Ghana, you're on Ghana land, and you see there that's Ghana is the land of the Adelaide Plains, and our language was was spoken. We were very fortunate that it was recorded by two German missionaries when they first came to our country in 1839. They developed a word list of over 2,000 words of our language, because that was important, because they taught our children from 1839 to 1845 on the banks of the river for 6 years, just up the road here near the Adelaide Weir, a place we call Pilter Wadley, which is Possum House, which was really the name for the schoolhouse that they taught in. And fortunate enough for that unfortunately that school was shut down, but we were able to, through the research of our Associate Professor Rob Amery, through his PhD and work that he on Ghana language, he was able to find, get that language list back and from Germany and stuff, so that we could start reviving our language. And then this really started in the 1980s, because our language wasn't spoken from 1860 on an everyday basis from then. So, and the last fluent Aboriginal Ghana language speaker was Ivor Ritchie, who died in 1929. So there was a big gap between 1929 and to the 80s, when our language was sort of on the endangered way of dying out. So fortunately, through our elders, they got together with Rob Amery and language teachers, and we started reviving the language in as I said, in the late 1980s, and that work's continued today. And we're fortunate enough that we're getting more and more young people, Ghana young people, and not only Ghana young people. We believe that all like people that live in the Adelaide region should have access to Aboriginal Kaurna language, and we have a vision of one day that language being taught in the schools of all schools in the Adelaide Plains region. That's our big vision. So hopefully we'll get there. We have a plan in place to train up Kaurna language teachers, and through, I'll go back, how do I click on that? Through the Kaurna website.
Go to the website.
Yeah.
Where did I put it? Here.
Yeah.
There we go.
So we established a formal relationship with the University of Adelaide. You haven't got it.
No, it's not there. I've got to cancel the presentation and then go to the website. There we go.
Okay. So, all right. So we developed a relationship with the University of Adelaide in formalised it in 2002, and we've continued to create Kaurna language resources through written, audio, and now in the last few years, video clips that encourage our young people to get involved with. And we know that with technology, you have to use it that attracts young people. And so, to finish off, I'd like to show you how we do that with especially young kindergarten kids. So, all right.
So we're hoping that the sound out will be a go. Let's give it a go. Do you want to introduce this? Or?
Oh, this is Pilter Waddley, which is a Pilter Waddley a video clip. So it's just a puppet language clip.
The Possum's House, featuring Rhoda, Pulga, and Pulla.
It's time for Kulla's Kaurna language lesson. How do you say hello in Kaurna, Kulla?
Oh, that's too easy, Pilter. You say Nina Mani.
Yes, I say Nina Mani, which means, are you good? And you say...
Mani I.
Yes, you say Mani I, which means, I'm good.
But what if I'm not good? Like this morning, I woke up and I was real dizzy and everything was spinning round. And yesterday, I had a real bad tummy ache and I couldn't do a poo. And the other day, I sat on an ant's nest by mistake.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass over.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Uncle Ron. So you've seen the dizzying heights of research excellence that we aspire to in NCARMS. Actually, that's a humorous way of saying that this program has enormous traction in Adelaide, which really doesn't exist in any other capital city in Australia for various reasons. As you walk around Adelaide, you will see that the Adelaide City Council has embraced the work of KWP and its steering committee, KWK, and there is dual signage in English and the Kaurna language throughout. People in Adelaide know the Kaurna place names of things, which is, again, extraordinary for an Australian capital city. And, you know, there are students from classes that I teach, some of whom are here with us today, whose, children and nephews and nieces in daycare centres and primary schools and kindergartens know these characters, know this show, and know how to say rudimentary phrases in Kaurna, which for the general population of Australia is, again, extraordinary. So the work that you do in KWP on this front is absolutely groundbreaking and world class. So thank you. Thank you for presenting today. Moving on. Next, I'd like to introduce Karina Lester, Manager of the Mobile Language Team. Their work is equally extraordinary, and their reach is across not just one language, but multiple languages, sometimes up to a dozen in South Australia and beyond at any given time. So, Karina, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all for the opportunity just to chat with you and just give a small insight into the mobile language team. But before I do, I just want to acknowledge and say thank you to Uncle Rod for welcoming us to country, because I'm from the far north of the state, from the Arnongo Pijanjara Yangunjara lands, so I'm not from the Adelaide region. So I just want to acknowledge, because I'm from a different language group area. I've been working down here at the University of Adelaide for the mobile language team for 9 years now, 10 years. 10 years now. So we've been doing some amazing things, and as Professor Aaron said, that we have been covering a majority of the state as well. Apart from the great work that we've heard from KWP and the Ghana language work, we've been covering a lot of the other areas in the mid-north of the state of South Australia, but also to the far northwest and eastern areas as well of the state of South Australia, and over the border, because our languages don't stop at the territory and state borders. So we've been going over to those state borders as well to continue the work that we've been doing. So 3 of our key strategies is to increase the number of our young people speaking their language and their own heritage language, but also to make language resources readily available for those communities and for the Aboriginal people of the state of South Australia, but also to promote and raise awareness of the value of Aboriginal languages as well across all communities in South Australia. But a big part of our work at the mobile language team is also talking it up at a national level as well, about the importance of our languages in South Australia as well. So over the 10 years now, we've been really focusing on engaging with our community and taking the leadership from our community on their language program, which has been really important for us as a small team within the University of Adelaide, to really make sure that our guidance and leadership is coming from grassroots and from our community on their language program. So we go out there and meet with our communities, spend a lot of time in documenting and doing as much work as we can across the state on their language, which is a really important part of the work of the mobile language team. Just on a recent trip to the beautiful Uluru, we did some work with UNESCO, a project funded by UNESCO on the Yangunjara Storytellers Project, which is a big part of Uluru area where Yangunjara language is spoken, and that's a part of my community as well. So it was a wonderful opportunity to get out there and do some oral history recording of our Yangunjara storytellers, and to really gather those stories in Yangunjara, in the language, and to also be able to back it up with an archival place that we have called Ara Iridija. And I'll talk a little bit about Ara Iridija in a minute as well. So it was really important for us to introduce our Yangunjara storytellers in Wanga, in our language, but also to capture all those oral history stories and the stories of our country as well. And as I mentioned, our languages don't stop at those borders. So up there at Uluru into the beautiful Northern Territory, and you can see Uluru in the background as well, was a great location for us to be really talking up strongly about our Yangunjara language as well. Some great footage there again with another family member of mine called Annie Pixie Brown, who's a Yangunjara woman, and this is around the eastern side of Uluru, which is a very unique place for us to be not only recording the stories, but also making people aware of the importance and the significance of that place, Uluru, and why it's important to Arnongajuda, to the Aboriginal people of that area there, and the place that it is for our learning of our law and our culture as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of this oral history recording and capturing those stories in Yangunjara has been backed up and provided all those recordings to our archival place called Ara Iridija. And Ara Iridija is a place called, Ara means stories, stories and the way things were back then in the past, and Iridija is of long ago. And so a big part of the Ara Iridija project was because of the early mission days back in the 30s and 40s, Ernabella Mission was established. A lot of missionaries had captured a lot of those materials of photos and starting to document the language as well. And so Ara Iridija came from Arnongo, from Aboriginal people from that missionary day, really concerned but also wanting to share that story of that mission. And so a project like this, Ara Iridija, was born when senior men had got together to really talk about all those important stories of long ago from the mission days, and the first parts of documenting our language. Ngajajara is a language in Western Australia, and then you have Bijanjara close to the border of South Australia and WA, and also Yangunjara, which is coming across to the eastern side of the APY lands area as well. And those three languages had a huge part of that mission that was established back then in the far north of the state in the Musgrave Ranges. So Bugaja, known today, but Ernabella Mission, known back in the past, was a big driver of this project called Ara Iridija because of all those old mission materials. And so a lot of our information is archived on this database. And I just want to read a little bit about some of the mission from the Ara Iridija project, and just to give you guys some insight as well, that the Ara Iridija project is a strong growing project, of course, which collects and preserves for perpetuity historical, traditional and contemporary Arnongal material and stories, but also supports through the use of the database the maintenance of Arnongal culture and our language, but also delivers back to Arnongal, which is the word we use for we people from that Western Desert area, from the Arnongal, Bijanjara, Yangunjara lands, that they want to return back an interactive multimedia archive database, and databases with historical material that would otherwise be inaccessible to them, and sometimes it is part of the challenge when we try as Arnongal people or Aboriginal people to get access to our records. It's a challenging time at times, but also one of the visions for Ara Iridija, this project, is to sustain the long-term management of and access to this historical material for Arnongal. So we're very lucky with that particular language group and this little project, the Ara Iridija project, that we can archive our materials and add to the database of Ara Iridija as well. And the work of the mobile language team is crucial to actually giving the information to this archival place as well, Ara Iridija. It's a really important part, and as I read out, it is about also looking at contemporary, so the opportunity for the younger generation to be adding their content and sharing their stories today in those very remote communities in the far northwest of the state. So thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with you very briefly about the mobile language team and the work we do. Thank you.
Next is Karina's colleague from the mobile language team, Eleanor McCall, who's going to show us some of the online language learning resources that MLT has built. So without further ado, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm going to jump straight online. So let me
cancel out of the presentation. You go to Safari and you...
Oh, preloaded. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, only the best service here. There you go.
Okay, thank
Can
you.
you see that?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. So I work as a linguist with the mobile language team. Karina's my manager. So I just wanted to give a bit of insight into one of the forms that our work takes. So that our work is multifaceted. It could be anything from doing documentation with speakers of languages across the state of South Australia. Might be doing archival work to get some of those missionary documents and other things that Karina was talking about. It might be also facilitating learning programs, so that could be language clubs, workshops, that sort of thing, or more general community consultation as well. So we really get across the board with a few different things, and every community that we work with has approached us for the work that we do, so it all comes by community request, and we consult with them about the best way to help them revive or revitalise their language. So I just wanted to show you something we've recently launched. It's called the Mobile Language Team Online Language Learning Portal. You can see maybe the tiny address bar there. It's portal.mobilelanguageteam.com.au if you're interested in checking it out. So up here at the moment, we have a few of our languages that we've been developing. There's more to come. We work with approximately 11 languages at the moment, so some of them might want online content eventually, some maybe aren't interested in it. So let me go first into Arabana, which is a language that I've been, it's been blocked. Okay, let me go back and see if it likes anything else here. Yes, it is very interesting. It's just saying it's been blocked.
Is it an internet? It's an intranet issue. It's a security threat.
Okay, well, I'll just talk about it more generally then without the visual prompts. So, yeah, basically Arabana is the language that I've been working with for a few years now. They were sort of the beta tester for some of this online content. I wish I could show you it, but if you would like to jump on a line and have a look yourself, feel free to. Yeah, we'll just jump back on there. Thank you.
No, I'm going to hotspot off my phone.
Oh, okay.
Where's my phone gone?
Try the hotspot.
Oh, that's right. I'm in flight mode. Whoops.
Jet setter. Yeah. Always in flight mode.
Yeah, it doesn't like it, does it?
Anyway, I'll just keep speaking. Yep, we'll see if this comes up. If not, no problem. So Arabana is a language that's traditionally associated with Katitanda, which is the Lake Eyre district. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
I'll just go back to the internet.
I'll paint you a picture with my words. Traditionally associated with the Western Lake Eyre district, there's less than 10 speakers of this language remaining, and most of these speakers have been working really closely with us on this project, so that's really exciting. We've got this great community buy-in. Now it's not displaying this. I don't know. Why not? Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. So great community buy-in. We actually have a photo here of some of those speakers and other Arabana community members helping us with the development of the website. So basically, if you go into that Arabana online portal, what you'll see is a list of about 6 or 7 online language lessons. So you jump into those and they have different topics. So it could be greetings, introductions, plant names, animals, bit of grammar in there as well, so how verbs work in the language, and it's sort of self-guided learning. So you jump on and you can read a little bit about the topic and go through the vocabulary. You can click on each word and you hear recordings of these speakers that we've been making with them. So it's a really great way for people to do self-paced learning. And this was decided as a really good option for this community and by the community because the Arabana people are quite disparate. So they don't live on traditional country anymore. Most of them don't live on traditional country. They live across many different centres across Australia. So Alice Springs, Adelaide, Darwin, Sydney, Cooper Pedy, Oodnadatta. So it was really important to have something that they could all access. So this was considered a good sort of prong of their language project to have. You can go through and listen to the recordings. We also have some videos up there for people to do a bit of engagement with Arabana texts and to learn sort of the language and context. They're filmed on country, so you can see speakers out there with grinding stones explaining how the grinding stones were used in language. So it's just one example of how we're using the work that we're doing and what sort of format that might take. So I just wanted to show as well some of these nice images we have. We have developed this really great feedback system where I'll work with them to come up with a lesson together. We'll do those voice recordings for the lesson, and then we'll sit back down together as a group and we'll go through the lesson and make changes, and there's this really nice feedback loop happening. So this is something that we're developing for these other languages that we work on too. So that's another image. I love this because he's old Sydney Strangways, who's 86 years old there. He's showing someone who's quite a lot younger than him how to use the iPad. So I thought that was really lovely. And the website's actually all smartphone and iPad capable. So that's what he's showing her on the iPad. So I thought that was just a great example of how this sort of technology can work across a lot of different generations. So kids bring it up on their smartphone and listen to the sound recordings, and adults will read some of the grammatical information and process that. So it's been a really interesting, testing ground and really successful. A lot of engagement with it. One example of engagement is this really nice photo here, which is taken in Darwin, and it's one of the Arabana community members who's been working with us on this project. She does a Skype session with her grandchildren all around Australia, and they jump onto the website. So they've got the website open there, and then they've also got like 4 Skype screens open, including these 2 grannies there. So it's like a really nice way for them to engage with it. They've got a long distance relationship going anyway, so the website actually supports them with that. And we also run in-person language clubs in Adelaide and Port Augusta, where volunteers and speakers are coming in and using that website as kind of a prop for their in-person lessons, because getting up and teaching a class, even quite an informal setting, can be quite intimidating. So we found that it's been really helpful for that as well, like real-world in-person engagement. So anyway, I wanted to show you it, but I hope I've given you a bit of an idea of what it would look like. So please feel free to jump on and have a look yourself. But yeah, that was just a little bit of an example for you. Thank you.
Going back into flight mode now. Okay, next is Grayson Rotimer, who is my colleague in the Centre for Aboriginal Studies and Music. That's my home unit within the NCARMS cluster. And we work together in teaching and research and a whole range of outreach things just like this. So Grayson's going to talk about, I'll let Grayson talk about what he's going to talk about. Come on up. Yep, thanks. You know how to do that. Yeah, we'll see. And the last one has a link, but I can do that if you...
Okay. Oh, well, thank you for having me here. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm standing on Kaurna land, and acknowledge Uncle Rod over here has been a very strong role model for me. I'm Grayson Rotimer. I'm from Gold Coast area of Australia, Bundjalung community actually, but I've been here for 20 years, and I've learnt a lot. I've come down to Chasm in, I don't want to say how long ago, but it was a fair while ago, and realised that music has been a pathway for a lot of Aboriginal people over many years. And more of late, we've found that music can also create an avenue for language and cultural revival. So I'm going to give a bit of a historical overview of what Chasm has been to the nation in terms of a music entity, and also locally. So here we go. So in the 1970s, the Centre for Aboriginal Studies in Music, or Chasm, was a musical incubator for new and emerging forms of cultural production. Ethnomusicologist Kath Ellis began this program and was instrumental when it merged 3 forms of Aboriginal Australians, and one of them was the traditional component, more of the city, street or urban component of Aboriginal musician, and then non-Indigenous musicians. Part of Chasm's initial operation was to provide education and support to Indigenous musicians, dancers and community, and to develop a broader South Australian community by encompassing pre-existing Aboriginal music and dance traditions. And you can see up there, this is one of my early classes I was in when I was at Chasm in 91. So the Anonga would come down to Chasm in Fenner Street, and it was quite a cultural shock for me because I come from the east coast of Australia, quite different to Central Desert. So, and they would teach us Inma, which is song and dance, but they'd also embrace us and teach us the more profound understanding of why songs are important to community. Then they would take the Chasm students and we'd go up into the lands, up into Karina's area there, for something like 10 days field trip. And we would get painted up late afternoon and perform these songs with community. And there would be something like 50 Anangu community there, which is quite empowering. But then you'd take that away, and even though that wasn't part of where I came from, East Coast, different mob, Bunjalung community, there were lots of things that empowered me to go back to find out my own heritage, my own culture. And so the journey began. It wasn't until a few years later where I got a call from Adelaide University and they said, Grayson, how'd you like to come down and teach? And I thought, yeah, right. No thanks. Anyway, I thought I'll give it a go. I'll give it 6 months. And next minute, 20 years later, I'm still here. But what was empowering about that is I found out that inside of me, inside my own journey, was music and language and my own culture, and how I can disseminate that towards my own mob, using music and language. Aaron, how do I do this next level here? Aha. So in the 70s and 80s, Chasm had started a new direction in contemporary music, whatever that means. But what it was, to me, on reflection, was how the urban Aboriginal people, because came into Adelaide University, because Chasm actually was an Aboriginal orchestra at some stage. And it's quite incredible for that time. But it started to get a momentum growing. And so what had happened, a lot of people from the streets playing rock music, different instruments would come in and wanted to learn and study. So one of those big influences in terms of Indigenous songwriting was No Fixed Address. People like Barna Laurie, Bart Willoughby, Steve Chai, all these guys came through Chasm and started to create different forms of music. And that was quite empowering for me in influencing my direction. What happened after that is we started to create archives and recording. We had a recording studio, and language and music started to emerge in terms of what Chasm was doing at the University of Adelaide. Oh, sorry, do you want me to take a selfie, Aaron? And I'll cut this short. One of the legacies of music and language is contemporary Indigenous sounds. So if we just reflect back to the start where I was up in the APY lands learning Inmanyinyi, and then meeting a lot of my students from the APY lands coming through Chasm. Here is a shot of a guy named Zachariah Fielding, who was part of the Chasm program, in front of the Opera House, singing traditional songs in a contemporary model. One of these songs actually was put forward for Eurovision this year, which is incredible, particularly when you think about the importance of this being the year of languages and what legacies you can create through programs such as Chasm. Aaron, can I play this?
You can.
Please?
The best way to do it is, again, switch out, go to Safari, and, yeah, together. Yeah. Yeah. How about all right, yeah. Okay. Sorry, back to the regularly scheduled program, wrong one. Yeah, so that should play. You want me to just play? Or
I'll just play this. So in closing, I'll just play this song. I think it's only fitting to give you an example of what Chasm and a program such as Chasm can do. Righto, let's see if I can do this right.
Bukularua, buku bukularua, bukularua.
Okay, so the song is going around. It's got this, incredible infectious groove, pukulpa, and it actually means happy. And, we all know the importance of music and language and culture. It has to make you happy. That's the importance of it. So I'd just like to say thank you for hearing me today, and I'll pass it on to Aaron. But hang around, we have another legacy from the Chasm program, two actually, Courtney and Nathan May, and they're going to give a live performance for you soonish. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, over to me, and we're in the home stretch. Look, to bring all this back to the work of NCARMS overall and what we do and why we do it and how it fits into your work as archivists, I'm going to point out a few, I think, high-level issues around, Indigenous language and cultural maintenance in Australia, and what is being done about that, at least insofar as we're concerned. So what you've heard up until now is relatively good news. These are relatively good news stories about the way that Indigenous communities are making their own ways forward in maintaining and, in some cases, revitalising their own languages and cultures. But of the roughly 250 discrete Australian languages that existed at the time of first British settlement in Australia at 1788, fewer than 60% of those, as Uncle Rod alluded to before, are in everyday use, and all but 5% of those original Australian languages are highly endangered. In South Australia, this state alone, there are 45 discrete Australian languages which MLT does its best to cater to the needs of. And really, when it comes to those South Australian languages, or rather Australian languages of South Australia, the only people in the world doing this kind of work with those languages are pretty much sitting here on this podium and in our offices across the river at the University of Adelaide. That's it. That's it. The University of Adelaide and the Faculty of Arts there provides us excellent support in terms of a place to work, the power bills, office, purpose-built studios and recording facilities, running our finances, all the rest. But yet, an enormous amount of our work, due to just the fact that Australian public research and university funding doesn't stretch all that far, an enormous amount of our work is externally funded, which means that the managers of these projects are, like most small community-led entities around the world, they're writing and acquitting grants constantly from external sources. And we have about 20 people, most of whom are part-time on staff across all the different moving parts of NCARM. Almost 50% of those people are Indigenous Australians, as represented in this cluster here on stage with me. But almost all of those people are externally funded. So there are enormous challenges in keeping this work going. These are challenges that keep me and other people on this stage awake at night, constantly. Just before I move on, my own work and training over the past 25 years, firstly it was with these communities in northeast Arnhem Land, right at the top of Australia. I then worked with Warlpiri communities in the Tanami Desert for half a decade, and I also have relationships with Yempa community in what's considered to be far west New South Wales. All those communities are in different states of maintenance and in some cases revival with their languages and culture. The community at the top of Australia in the north that I've worked with wasn't really part of Australia in any other way than on paper until about the 1920s. There was no contact. So when I first met these people in the 1990s, there was living memory of having had no contact with the rest of Australia. The Tanami Desert, this green blob in the centre, is kind of the same. I think the first town, which is now Lajamanu, which was established in that Warlpiri community, I think it was established in something like 1964. There were no towns in the Tanami Desert before that. And a lot of the colleagues I've worked with who are Warlpiri from the Tanami Desert grew up in the bush and lived as children as people had lived here for countless generations, stretching back to antiquity. Finally, the Yempa group in Brewarrina Shire, they're a group that's assumed to have lost all of their language and culture, half a century ago. There are no fluent speakers of the Yempa language, but the level of cultural retention is still nonetheless very, very high. It's just not necessarily shared with everybody because of the fear of, I guess, further loss. What do we do about this in pragmatic ways that enable Indigenous people and communities to move forward in the way that they want? Well, I think we've already answered that question. We create the spaces and provide the resources to enable those communities and people from those communities, like my colleagues here, to drive their own agendas and meet their own goals. In my own circumstance, acknowledging that Australia was not acquired by the Crown in what you could call a fair or transparent way, and the reality that most Australians live and work in Australia, not necessarily through historical reasons of their own making, on land that is not necessarily is not uncontestably held by the Crown, and actually, arguably belongs to Indigenous peoples. How do we move forward with the kinds of Indigenous collections that are created and still made now? Living with that cognitive dissonance. The only way that I've found to do it is, as I said, it's to create opportunities for Indigenous peoples and communities to have self-determination in what they want to do with their culture, their languages, their research, their resources. And uneasily, we try to accommodate that as best we can. This is a list of grants I've had that are largely, but not entirely, Indigenous-led. And the man pictured there was my original Yolngu teacher from northeast Arnhem Land, who worked with the president of the ASA, Julia Mant, and I for a period of about, nearly 10 years. And effectively, the grants that we had with Joe Goombala liberated a huge number of collections from Arnhem Land, including a lot of photographs, stretching back to the very first contacts with Yolngu communities in the 1920s. So the kinds of photographs that... Where's my mouse gone? I can't see my mouse. There it is. So the kinds of photographs that we repatriated to Yolngu communities are ones like this that show, people hunting for turtle and traditional canoes and stuff like that. And these are the very earliest photos ever taken in Arnhem Land. and they featured images of a lot of Joe's and everybody else's immediate ancestors, their parents and grandparents. So this kind of work is World Heritage. It is fragile. It is constantly at risk of falling over due to lack of resources, yet we persevere. Joe himself, through his work with me and Julia and others, also set to creating his own, contemporary archival resources. And all of the material that I collected with Joe and other Yolngu community people is backed up in the Mulka Project archive. The Mulka Project is the Art Centre, Media Production Centre and digital repository for Yolngu communities located in the town of Yirrkala, and it's basically far more accessible to most Yolngu community people than, say, Melbourne or Canberra would be. My personal archive in that collection currently has about 20,000 digital files in it, and not everything is there yet because some of that needs to be digitised. So finally, and we are getting to the end, is Lee Amoroso, because on top of all of this work, in the Centre for Aboriginal Studies and Music, which stretches back to the beginnings of the Adelaide Aboriginal Orchestra in 1972, CASM has an enormous collection of paper and boxes and audio-visual recordings, all of which are endangered, that we need to deal with right now. And we have teams of students, wave after wave of them, working around the clock like winged monkeys, actually processing those materials, and all of my teaching is a front for getting that done. If you have interns that you want to send to a project, send them to me. Just don't even think about anywhere else. We've got work. We've got endless amounts of work. So Lee has been an amazing help and support to us in meeting the demands of making sure that this heritage actually stays safe, is properly accessioned and looked after, and then made discoverable and accessible to people who will need it in the future. So over to you, Lee. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. The opportunity for collaboration came about because of the usual facilities issue of a lack of storage space. Over 100 cartons and boxes of CASM records had been moved several times over the last 5 years. Working with Aaron, we arrived at an idea to have students box and list while at the same time engage with primary archival sources for their assignment. In the end, the project has become so much more than a simple listing task. This was an unusual assignment using archival resources because the CASM records had not been appraised, they'd not been arranged and described, nor had they been curated. We were providing access before any arrangement and description. And while we thought carefully about the privacy risks associated with this, we feel we have adequately put things in place to minimise the risk. After all, being risk-averse is the enemy of getting things done, and as it's turned out, the outcome has been overwhelmingly positive. So for the last 2 years, different groups of students have sat creating box lists. For most students, it was their first time using archival material. After several boxing and listing sessions, students presented on what items resonated and had impact. They have shown us through their presentations what they believe is important in the collection. They've experienced the serendipitous nature of archival research and the delight of the unexpected gem among the dreary. I guess on reflection, we've had 2 hours each week during term time discussing the collection as a whole and the archival items in detail. We've discussed with students their archival finds, the context, the why is this here, the relationships between items, and the misfiled, the incomplete, and the reference copies. Things that an archival researcher may not usually experience. We've discussed information management concepts of creation and capture, access, copyright, institutional record keeping versus personal record keeping, and a whole range of other things along the way. Importantly, these topics have been student-led as they related to items they were listing. This is our archival approach. It is certainly no macro appraisal, though it's definitely quite the opposite. It's what I've come to recognise as slow appraisal, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. So what started out as a purely pragmatic task delivered by others has for me evolved into a reflection on my own archival practice. What I've realised is the greatest friend for appraisal is time, and that working with users at the beginning rather than the end is just as exhilarating. On reflection, and in some ways quite accidentally, our CASM students are designing our CASM archive, and that approach is something we hope to build on across NCARMs. Thank you.
Concise, beautifully timed. No, look, I mean, we are incredibly lucky. We are incredibly lucky to have a main line into the university's resourcing and expertise in this. And I think that what we have been able to develop together around protecting these resources and hopefully making them accessible to the right people in the future is exceptional. So thank you very much. Finally, and this is basically it. We have two of our students who are going to do a song each. The first is Courtney Lawton. She's not nervous at all. Courtney, do you want to say who you are, or do you want to say where you're from, or do you want me to say where you're from? No, you can say it, and then she'll be followed by Nathan.
Hello.
Do you want that?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Hi, I'm Courtney Lawton, and I'm from Darwin. And I wrote this song this year at CASM, and I hope you like it. Sometimes I imagine what life would be like if I didn't. It's too far out of reach, but is it? It's so close now, I can feel it. I've struggled to leave loved ones behind, to climb mountains. The calling is real, and I found my soul, and I found comfort in myself. The journey may be long, but when I get there, when you believe in yourself and take the chance to reach the stars, when you believe in yourself, when you fall, you might just fly. Well, I took a risk, and I wished upon a star, and now I feel it. It's something special around the corner. Just wait and see what life has in store for me. When you believe in yourself and take the chance to reach the stars. When you believe in yourself, when you fall, you might just fly. I question, is this fate? Is this the time for me? I question, it wasn't there before. I question, is this fate? Is this the time for me? I question that open door, 'cause it wasn't there, wasn't there, wasn't there before.
Next is a man who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. It's Nathan May. Nathan May is not only one of Chasm's most successful recent alumnus, he's also one of the Elder Conservatorium of Music, some most successful students currently in program overall. I know you tune your guitar, but he far overshadows a huge number of other people in program, which isn't to say that they're bad. It's just that he's really good. So over to you, Nathan. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. It's good to be here today. Acknowledge that we're on Kaurna land. I come down here about 7 years ago to study at the University of Adelaide with Chasm, and during that time, I guess I didn't have an identity. I didn't know much about my people. My nana is an Arabana woman, and she was born in Magarey. And my grandfather was actually born in Balaclava as well. And he was taken away from the evacuation of the bombing of Darwin. And I found this identity in music, and I started writing songs and writing about things that mean a lot to me. And I wrote this song about 3 weeks ago, so it's very new. And I might have to tune it up again, but it's a very new song. And I was adopted into a family that was Christians, and they played in the church band. I used to go and play the drums. And when I first started at Chasm, I didn't have no idea how to play guitar. I wouldn't say I was the greatest singer, eh, Grayson? So you're probably all like, Jesus, are you going to be all right? Or does he know what he's doing? He's tuning his guitar up. But here we go, I'll play this song. This is about searching for an identity and the stars when I was blazing up looking for my grandmother. Ever since you went on that dream, I've been trying to sit here and think, 'cause I'm trying to find you. Yes, I'm trying to find you. And my heart gets lonesome at night, and I think back on my times, lost and confused. You left here way too soon. But up on the hills I see the light, and up through the trees I see the stars shining too. While I'm trying to find you, ooh, I'm trying to find you, looking out for that shining star, 'cause I'm trying to find you. And I'm so broken right now, and I think you'll be so proud, and I want to tell you everything that I've been through. And I met a girl you like, She makes me happy inside, but I won't forget how you told me to chase my dreams too. 'Cause up on the hills I see the lights, and up through the trees I see the stars shining too. While I'm trying to find you, ooh, trying to find you, looking out for that shining star, 'cause I'm trying to find you. I'm trying to find you, ooh, trying to find you, looking out for that shining star, 'cause I'm trying to find you. Thank you.
That's it from me. This is where to find us and how to contact us. Thank you all for being here with us this morning, this afternoon, whatever we're in now, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.